Frank Lucas walked into Bumpy Johnson's funeral with $100,000 cash. What he did with it made every mobster in Harlem respect him. Chapter 1. The day Harlem's king died, July 7, 1968. Frank Lucas got the call at 6:47 a.m. He's gone. 2 words, that's all it took. Bumpy Johnson, the most powerful black gangster in American history, was dead. Heart attack, just like that. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. Frank dropped the phone, sat on the edge of his bed staring at nothing. His boss, his mentor, his father figure, dead at 62. Bumpy had been Frank's everything for the last 15 years. Taught him the game, taught him how to move, how to think, how to survive in a world that wanted black men dead or in prison. And now Bumpy was gone. Frank's wife, Eva, touched his shoulder. "Baby, what's wrong?" "Bumpy's dead." Eva gasped. "Oh, God, Frank, I'm so sorry." But Frank wasn't listening. His mind was already racing, calculating, because Frank Lucas understood something that nobody else in Harlem understood yet. When a king dies, there's a war for the throne. And Bumpy Johnson's throne was worth $50 million a year in heroin, numbers, and protection money. Every mobster in New York was going to be at that funeral. The Italians, the Irish, the Chinese, all of them circling like sharks, trying to figure out who was going to take over Harlem now that Bumpy was gone. And they all assumed it would be one of them, a white mobster, someone connected, someone with power and soldiers and money. They weren't even thinking about Frank Lucas. Frank was just Bumpy's driver, his errand boy, the guy who carried Bumpy's bags and picked up his dry cleaning. Nobody took Frank seriously. Nobody saw him as a threat. That was about to change. Frank stood up, started getting dressed. Eva watched him. "Where are you going?" "To the bank." "The bank? Baby, it's not even 7 in the morning." "I need to withdraw some money." "How much money?" Frank looked at his wife. "All of it." 3 hours later, Frank walked out of Chase Manhattan Bank with $100,000 in cash. In 1968, that was the equivalent of about $800,000 today. A briefcase full of $100 bills. Every penny Frank had saved from 15 years of working for Bumpy, his entire life savings. Eva was waiting in the car. "Frank, what are you doing?" "I'm going to Bumpy's funeral." "With $100,000 in cash? Are you insane? Someone could rob you, kill you." Frank looked at his wife. "Baby, I'm about to walk into a room with every gangster in New York. If I'm walking in there, I'm walking in there like a king, not like Bumpy's errand boy, like a king." "But Frank, trust me." The funeral was at Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, the biggest church in the neighborhood, big enough to hold 2,000 people. It was packed, standing room only. Every seat filled with gangsters, politicians, community leaders, people who owed Bumpy favors, people who feared Bumpy, people who loved Bumpy, and sitting in the front 3 rows, dressed in their finest suits, were the Mobsters. Frank recognized all of them. Carmine Tramonti from the Lucchese family, Joe Colombo, Crazy Joe Gallo, Nicky Barnes and his crew, the Italian Mafia, the Black Gangsters, all of them sitting together, pretending to mourn Bumpy while secretly calculating how to carve up his empire. Frank walked in late, on purpose, wearing a black suit, black tie, black fedora, carrying a briefcase. Every head turned. Who the hell was this? Oh, Bumpy's driver, the errand boy. People went back to their conversations. Frank didn't sit down. He walked straight to the front of the church, to Bumpy's casket, set the briefcase on the floor, opened it. If you're already hooked by this story, Hit that subscribe button right now because what happens next is going to blow your mind. I promise you've never heard this story before. Frank reached into the briefcase, pulled out a stack of $100 bills, $10,000, and placed it on top of Bumpy Johnson's chest. Inside the casket, the church went silent. What the hell was he doing? Frank pulled out another stack, $10,000, placed it on the casket, then another, and another, and another. 10 stacks, $100,000 in cash, stacked on top of Bumpy Johnson's body. The entire church was frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Frank Lucas, Bumpy's nobody driver, had just put $100,000 cash into a dead man's casket in front of 2,000 people. Then Frank did something even more shocking. He turned around, faced the entire church, faced every mobster, every gangster, every killer, and he spoke. My name is Frank Lucas. For 15 years, I worked for Bumpy Johnson, and Bumpy taught me one thing above everything else. He said, Frank, in this life, you're either somebody or you're nobody. And the only way people know you're somebody is if you show them. Frank gestured to the casket, to the money. Bumpy Johnson was somebody, the greatest somebody Harlem has ever seen. And when a king dies, you don't let him go into the ground broke. You send him off like royalty. So that's what I'm doing. I'm sending my king off with $100,000 because that's what he deserves. That's what respect looks like. The church was still silent. Frank continued. Now I know what all of you are thinking. You're thinking, who's going to run Harlem now? Who's going to take over Bumpy's operation? You're thinking it's going to be one of you. Frank pointed at the Italian mobsters in the front row. You think it's going to be the Italians. You think you're going to come up here and take what Bumpy built. He pointed at Nicky Barnes and the black gangsters. You think it's going to be you. You think you're next in line. Frank shook his head. You're all wrong, because Bumpy didn't leave his empire to any of you. He left it to me. The church erupted, people shouting, mobsters standing up. Nicky Barnes jumped to his feet. You're nobody. You're a driver. Frank didn't flinch. I was a driver. Now I'm the king. And here's how I know. Because I just put $100,000 in cash into Bumpy's casket in front of all of you. And not one of you can do what I just did. Not one of you has that kind of money to throw away. Not one of you has that kind of respect for Bumpy to send him off right. Frank locked eyes with Carmine Tremonti. You Italians been taxing Harlem for 50 years, taking 20% of everything we make, treating us like we work for you. That's over. Starting today, Harlem belongs to Harlem. You want to do business here? You come to me. You ask permission. You pay me. Tremonti's face went red. You got some balls, kid. I got $100,000 in that casket that says I got more than balls. I got respect, I got loyalty, and I got vision. 3 things none of you have. Frank turned to Nicky Barnes. And you. You've been waiting for Bumpy to die so you could take over. But you don't have what it takes. You want to be flashy. You want to be famous. You want everybody to know your name. That's how you get killed. That's how you get arrested. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to be smart. And I'm going to get rich. And 5 years from now, when I'm making $1 million a day, you're going to wish you'd shown me respect today. The church was in chaos now. People arguing, mobsters threatening, but Frank Lucas didn't care. He'd already won. He'd done what nobody expected. He'd walked into a room full of killers and claimed a throne nobody thought he deserved. And he'd backed it up with $100,000 cash that proved he was serious. Frank turned back to Bumpy's casket. Rest in peace, boss. I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to take everything you taught me and build an empire so big that 50 years from now, people are still going to be talking about Frank Lucas." Then Frank Lucas walked out of that church. Every eye on him, every mobster calculating whether to kill him or respect him. Smash that like button if you can't believe what Frank just did, because this is just the beginning of the craziest power grab in gangster history. Chapter 2, The Aftermath. Frank Lucas walked out of Abyssinian Baptist Church and got into his car. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline. He'd just done the most insane thing any gangster had ever done. Claimed a criminal empire in front of 2,000 witnesses. Put $100,000 in a casket to prove he was serious. And challenged the Italian mafia to their faces. Eva was in the driver's seat. Her eyes were wide. "Frank, what the hell did you just do?" "I just became king of Harlem." "Baby, you just signed your death warrant. The Italians are going to kill you. Nicky Barnes is going to kill you. Everybody in that church wants you dead right now." Frank lit a cigarette. "Maybe, but they're not going to do it today. You know why? Because I put $100,000 in that casket, and every gangster in there is asking themselves the same question. If Frank Lucas can throw away $100,000 like it's nothing, how much money does he really have? How connected is he? How dangerous is he?" Eva shook her head. "You're crazy." "No, I'm strategic. Bumpy taught me that. Make a move so bold that people can't figure out if you're stupid or genius. And while they're trying to decide, you consolidate power." "What if they decide you're stupid?" "Then I die, but at least I'll die as somebody, not as Bumpy's driver." They drove back to Frank's apartment in silence. When they got inside, the phone was already ringing. Frank answered. "Yeah?" "Frank Lucas?" The voice was Italian, thick accent. "Who's this?" "This is Carmine Tramunti. We need to talk." Frank's blood went cold. Carmine Tramunti was the acting boss of the Lucchese crime family. One of the 5 families that ran New York. If Tramunti wanted to talk, it meant one of 2 things: a deal or a death sentence. "Talk. Not on the phone. Meet me at Rao's restaurant tonight, 8 p.m. Come alone." The line went dead. Eva looked at Frank. "Who was that?" "The mafia. They want to meet." "Are you going?" Frank nodded. "I have to. If I don't show, they'll think I'm scared. And if they think I'm scared, I'm dead anyway." "Frank," "I know, baby. I know." That night, Frank Lucas walked into Rao's restaurant in East Harlem. It was a tiny place, 10 tables, but it was the most exclusive restaurant in New York. You couldn't get a reservation unless you were connected. And tonight, the entire restaurant had been cleared. Just one table, Carmine Tramunti sitting there with 4 bodyguards. Frank walked over, sat down. Tramunti looked at him for a long moment. "You got balls, kid. I'll give you that." "I learned from the best." "Bumpy was smart. You? I don't know yet. You might be smart. You might be suicidal. Time will tell." Tramunti poured 2 glasses of wine. "Here's the situation. Bumpy had an arrangement with us. He ran Harlem. We took 20%. Everybody was happy. Now Bumpy's gone, and you're sitting there telling me that arrangement is over. That's a problem." "It's only a problem if you make it one." Tramunti's eyes narrowed. "You threatening me?" "I'm stating facts. Harlem is my territory now. I'm not paying you 20%. I'm not paying you anything. But I'm not your enemy either. I'm not trying to expand into your territory. I'm not trying to take your business. I just want what's mine." "And what makes you think you can hold Harlem without our permission?" Frank leaned forward. "Because I have something you don't have. I have the people. Harlem trusts me. Harlem knew Bumpy. They knew I worked for Bumpy. They know I put $100,000 in his casket out of respect. You think you can walk into Harlem and take over? They'll riot. They'll burn down every corner you try to claim. But me, they'll work with me because I'm one of them. Tremonti considered this. And the money? That $100,000 you threw away. Where'd you get that kind of cash? I saved it 15 years working for Bumpy. I didn't waste it on cars and women and jewelry like everyone else. I saved every penny because I knew one day I'd need it. Today was that day. So you're broke now. I'm invested. There's a difference. Tremonti smiled. You're smart, kid. Smarter than I thought. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 6 months. 6 months to prove you can run Harlem without us. If you can do it, if you can hold your territory, make money, keep the peace, then we'll respect your independence. But if you fail, if there's chaos, if you lose control, if you can't pay your people, we step in and we take everything. Deal? Frank extended his hand. Deal. They shook. Frank Lucas had just negotiated peace with the mafia, temporarily, but 6 months wasn't long, and Frank knew the Italians were betting he'd fail, betting he'd crumble, betting that without Bumpy, Frank was nothing. They were about to learn they were wrong. Drop a comment right now telling me if you think Frank can pull this off, because what he does in the next 6 months changes organized crime forever. Chapter 3. Building an Empire. Frank Lucas walked out of Rao's restaurant alone. That was step 1. Step 2 was harder, actually taking control of Harlem's drug trade without getting killed, arrested, or overthrown. The problem was simple. Everyone in Harlem's underworld thought Frank was a joke. They'd seen him as Bumpy's driver for 15 years, the guy who opened doors and carried bags. Now he was claiming to be the new king. Nobody was buying it. Nicky Barnes was the first to test him. 3 days after Bumpy's funeral, Barnes walked into one of Frank's heroin spots on 145th Street and told Frank's dealers they worked for him now. Told them Frank was finished. Told them the real gangsters were taking over. When Frank found out, he didn't get angry. He got surgical. That night, Frank went to see Nicky Barnes at his apartment, walked right up to the door, knocked. Nicky opened it, surprised. Frank, what the hell are you? Frank pulled out a gun, put it to Nicky's forehead. You got 2 choices. Choice 1, you come work for me. I'll make you my lieutenant. You'll get rich. You'll be respected. You'll be my right hand. Choice 2, I pull this trigger right now, and every dealer in Harlem knows what happens when you disrespect Frank Lucas. Nicky's eyes went wide. You're bluffing. Am I? I just put $100,000 in a dead man's casket. You think I'm afraid to put a bullet in a live one? Nicky stared at Frank for a long moment, calculating. Frank could see it. Nicky was trying to figure out if Frank was serious. Frank pulled the hammer back on the gun. The click was loud in the silence. Choose. Okay, I'll work for you. Frank lowered the gun. Smart, because here's what you don't understand, Nicky. I don't want to be famous. I don't want my name in the streets. I want to make money, and you want to be a star. So here's the deal. You're going to be the face, the name, Mr. Untouchable, and I'm going to be the shadow, the supplier, the one nobody sees. You get the glory, I get the money, everybody wins. Nicky nodded slowly. That could work. It will work, because I'm smarter than you, and you're flashier than me. Together, we're unstoppable. That conversation changed everything. Nicky Barnes became Frank's public face, the gangster everyone knew, everyone feared, everyone talked about. Meanwhile, Frank Lucas operated in complete silence. Nobody knew where Frank's heroin came from. Nobody knew how he moved it. Nobody knew how much money he was making. And that's exactly how Frank wanted it. But Frank still had a problem. The heroin he was getting from the Italian suppliers was expensive and low quality. The Italians would buy it from the Corsican mafia in France, then sell it to black dealers in Harlem at a huge markup. Frank was paying $50,000 per kilo for heroin that was only 10% pure. By the time it hit the streets, it was cut so many times it was basically baby powder. Frank needed a new supplier, so he did something nobody in the American drug trade had ever done before. He went directly to the source. In 1969, Frank Lucas flew to Bangkok, Thailand, then to Vietnam, the Golden Triangle, the place where most of the world's opium was grown. Frank met with Chinese and Thai suppliers, negotiated directly, cut out every single middleman, the Italians, the Corsicans, everyone. And Frank made a deal. He would buy heroin directly from the source, pure heroin, 95% pure, for $4,000 per kilo instead of $50,000. Frank would smuggle it into America using a method nobody had thought of before. He would hide it in the coffins of dead American soldiers being shipped back from Vietnam. The military didn't check the coffins. They were sealed, sacred, untouchable. Frank bribed a few supply sergeants, and just like that, he had a pipeline that nobody could touch. When Frank's first shipment arrived in New York, he called it Blue Magic because it was blue, and because it was so pure, it was magic compared to everything else on the street. Frank's Blue Magic was 95% pure. The Italian mafia's heroin was 10% pure. Frank could cut his heroin 9 times, and it would still be better than anything else in New York. And because he'd cut out the middlemen, Frank could sell it cheaper and still make 10 times the profit. Within 6 months, Frank Lucas controlled 80% of Harlem's heroin trade. He was making $1 million per day. He had 250 people working for him. He owned buildings, businesses, cars. He was richer than the mafia, and the Italians had no idea how he'd done it. Carmine Tremoni called Frank back to Rao's restaurant. "How are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Making this kind of money, moving this much product. We've been in this business for 50 years and we can't figure out your supply chain." Frank smiled. "That's because you're thinking like Italians. I'm thinking like a businessman. You want to know my secret? I don't have partners. I have employees. Everyone works for me. Nobody gets a percentage. Nobody gets power. Just a salary. That way, nobody can betray me. Nobody can take over. I'm the only one who knows how everything works." Tremonti nodded slowly. "You're smarter than Bumpy. Bumpy taught me well. So what now? You going to expand? Try to take over Brooklyn? Queens?" "No, I'm going to stay in Harlem. Make my money. Keep my head down. I don't want to be John Gotti. I don't want to be famous. I want to be rich. There's a difference." Tremonti respected that. Smart. But Frank knew the truth. He wasn't staying small because he was humble. He was staying small because he was strategic. The bigger you get, the more attention you draw. And attention gets you killed or arrested. Frank Lucas wanted to make his money and disappear. He'd watched Bumpy die broke, watched other gangsters die in prison. Frank was going to be different. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this empire ends, because Frank's about to make the one mistake that costs him everything. Chapter 4. The One Mistake. For 5 years, Frank Lucas was untouchable. From 1969 to 1974, Frank made over $100 million. He owned buildings in Harlem, had homes in New Jersey, drove expensive cars, lived like royalty. But he stayed quiet. under the radar. The feds knew Frank existed, but they couldn't figure out where his heroin was coming from. They watched the Italian mafia, watched the Corsicans, watched the ports. Nothing. Frank's supply line was invisible, and that's what kept him safe. Then came the mistake. March 8, 1971, the fight of the century. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, Madison Square Garden, the biggest sporting event in American history. Every celebrity in the world was there, every gangster, every politician. Frank Lucas got a ringside seat, and Frank made a decision that would destroy everything. He wore a chinchilla coat, a $50,000 chinchilla coat, floor length, fur, flashy, the kind of coat that screams, "I'm rich and I want everyone to know it." Frank sat ringside with his wife, smiling, laughing, enjoying the fight, and across the arena a cop named Richie Roberts was watching. Richie Roberts was a detective in the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. He specialized in drug cases, and he'd been hearing whispers about Frank Lucas for 2 years. Nobody knew who Frank was. Nobody knew where his money came from. But Richie had a theory. And when he saw Frank Lucas sitting ringside in a $50,000 coat, Richie knew he was right. That coat was the proof. Nobody makes that kind of money legally. Nobody wears a $50,000 coat to a boxing match unless they're a drug dealer. Richie started investigating Frank Lucas the next day, followed him, watched his crew, traced his money, and slowly, piece by piece, Richie Roberts built a case. It took 4 years, but in 1975, Richie Roberts and the DEA raided Frank Lucas's house in Teaneck, New Jersey. They found $584,000 in cash, heroin, ledgers, evidence. Frank Lucas was arrested, facing life in prison. And as Frank sat in that jail cell, he realized the truth. Bumpy had warned him. "Frank, the moment you want people to know you're rich, you're finished. Stay invisible, stay quiet. The silent man lives, the loud man dies." Frank had stayed silent for 5 years, made $100 million, built an empire. Then he wore a chinchilla coat to a boxing match. And that one decision, that one moment of vanity, cost him everything. But Frank Lucas wasn't done. He had one card left to play. Frank called Richie Roberts from jail. "I want to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "I'll tell you everything. Everyone, the whole operation, the mafia, the corrupt cops, the supply chain, all of it. But I want a deal. I want reduced time." Richie thought about it. "How many people are we talking about?" "Over 100. Cops, mafia, dealers. I'll give you the biggest corruption case in New York history." Richie agreed, and Frank Lucas became an informant. He testified against the mafia, against corrupt NYPD detectives, against the French Connection drug ring. Frank's testimony led to over 100 arrests, including dozens of cops. The NYPD's Special Investigations Unit, the most corrupt unit in the department, was completely destroyed because of Frank's cooperation. Frank Lucas was sentenced to 70 years in prison, but because of his cooperation, that sentence was reduced to 15 years. He served 7, got out in 1981, and when Frank walked out of prison, the world had changed. The drug game was different, more violent, more chaotic. The crack epidemic was starting, and Frank Lucas was yesterday's news. Frank tried to go straight, started working with kids, telling them not to make his mistakes. He became a consultant on the movie American Gangster in 2007, where Denzel Washington played him. Frank Lucas died in 2019 at age 88. Natural causes, in his sleep. And people asked, was Frank Lucas a hero or a villain? The answer is both. Frank destroyed communities with heroin, killed people, ruined lives. But Frank also proved something important. He proved that a black man from North Carolina with nothing could outsmart the mafia, could build an empire, could change the game. Bumpy Johnson's funeral was the moment Frank Lucas went from nobody to somebody. And that $100,000 he put in Bumpy's casket, that wasn't just respect. That was an investment in a legend. Because 50 years later, people are still talking about the day Frank Lucas walked into a church with a briefcase full of cash and claimed a throne nobody thought he deserved. Leave a comment telling me, was Frank Lucas a genius? Or did that chinchilla coat prove he was just another gangster who got too cocky? Because that's the question everyone's still asking. Frank Lucas once said in an interview, "I learned from Bumpy that you can't be half a gangster. You either go all the way or you don't go at all. I went all the way. And yeah, I paid for it. But at least I got to be somebody. At least I got to be king, even if it was only for 5 years." Frank Lucas taught us something about power. Real power isn't loud. Real power is quiet. The moment you need people to know you're powerful, you've already lost. Frank stayed quiet for 5 years and became one of the richest criminals in American history. Then he got loud and lost everything. But here's the thing nobody talks about. That $100,000 Frank put in Bumpy's casket, Frank never regretted it. Years later in prison, someone asked Frank, "Do you wish you'd kept that money? You could have used it for lawyers, for your family." Frank said, No, that money bought me something more valuable than lawyers. It bought me respect. It bought me a reputation. It bought me a throne. For 5 years, I was the king of Harlem, and you can't put a price on that. Hit that like button one more time if this story taught you something about respect, power, and the cost of both. Because that's what Frank Lucas's life was really about. Not the drugs, not the money, the respect, and the price he paid to get it. Subscribe right now if you want more untold stories about the people who changed history by refusing to play by the rules. Because Frank Lucas didn't just break the rules. He rewrote them. Rest in peace, Frank Lucas. 1930 to 2019. The man who walked into a funeral with $100,000 and walked out a king. The man who proved that sometimes the boldest move is the smartest move. And the man who taught us that staying invisible is harder than being famous, but it's what keeps you alive. Frank Lucas is gone. But the legend of that funeral, the legend of that $100,000, that legend lives forever. The end.